We define ourselves through our history, culture, and food, but we so rarely think to stop and ask, how does it all work? Revealed examines the hows and whys while pulling the curtain back on the things you never thought to ask. On this episode, one of the world's most enchanting gardens and art installations, which started as elevated train tracks. It's the High Line. It's a feast for the senses. Gorgeous gardens above the city streets.
It's just an unbelievably magical vantage point. You see things differently, both literally and emotionally, when you're up walking on the High Line.
It's a haven away from the hustle and bustle of New York City, a history lesson for tourists and New Yorkers alike.
You are essentially walking, when you start it, from the past of New York City to the future. And they've kept a little bit of that grit intact, but it's beautifully landscaped, it's been beautifully redesigned, and you have a park that was built out of essentially nothing.
It was actually built out of something, an abandoned freight line.
I think I fell in love with the structure, the massive steel beams, the amazing Art Deco railings, and I just thought it would be amazing if New Yorkers could move through the city in this way.
But building a walkway through a garden on the High Line wasn't as easy as scattering a few seeds. It entailed an actual fight against City Hall and a race against a political clock.
It was really the courage of the founders who saw something magical up here and were absolutely determined to save it.
It's a great New York story of a small group of community members coming together and completely against all odds, David and Goliath, that really changed the way that you look at landscape in the city.
There's nothing like it anywhere else in the world. A mile and a half abandoned railroad track that has now been transformed into probably the top 20 gardens that you would want to see in your lifetime before you die.
You can almost forget that you're in the middle of Manhattan for a minute, and then you turn around and being like, oh, it's one of the most famous skyscrapers in the world right behind you, along with some of this modern architecture.
The High Line is an intersection of nature, art, and design. It has transformed the way New Yorkers and tourists enjoy and experience public space. It's a free garden built on a former railroad line, elevated 30 feet above the West Side and running 1.5 miles from Gansevoort Street to 34th Street, thanks to founders Joshua David and Robert Hammond.
It's a piece of historic preservation. It's an architectural piece, but it's also a landscape. So for it to be both building and landscape, it's a very unusual mix.
With 8 million visitors a year, more than any other attraction in New York, it's one of the city's top 10 most beloved attractions and a respite from the noise below.
When you walk up the stairs at the Gansevoort entrance and see a canopy of trees, we want you to suddenly go, okay, I have to reset. I'm at a different place.
The rail line was donated to the city by CSX, among the largest freight transportation companies in the U.S., and has become one of New York City's newest parks. Now, some of the most creative architecture and expensive real estate in the world surrounds the High Line. But to understand how this New York magical garden came together, we go back to the origins of a gritty city.
10th Avenue in Chelsea is really important and tied into the history of the High Line. So before the High Line went up, the rail ran at Street.
A century ago, the beating heart of New York City's industrial base was on Manhattan's West Side. Factories, warehouses, and even slaughterhouses were lined up along 9th and 10th Avenues, known today as the Meatpacking District. People made their way around merchandise coming off ships and loaded for delivery.
This was a very industrial manufacturing neighborhood west of 10th Avenue.
Trains, buggies, early trucks.
With no sewage system, no Department of Streets and Sanitation.
The streets were noisy, dirty, and polluted. It was chaos.
Bad as people think the traffic is now, 110 years ago, this was one of the deadliest thoroughfares in New York City.
In the 56 years from 1852 to 1908, there were 436 deaths and over 1,000 injuries on 10th Ave, and it soon became known as simply Death Avenue. And the New York Central Railroad, delivering coal, dairy products, and beef, was nicknamed the Butcher. The city imposed a speed limit to try and make 10th Avenue safer. Trains could not exceed 6 miles an hour. The railroad was also instructed to employ a, quote, person to precede the trains on horseback and give a suitable warning, unquote.
They were called the West Side Cowboys. These were literally cowboys on horseback, and they would ride ahead of the trains. And you had these urban cowboys riding down 10th Avenue, warning people, train's about to come barreling through. It was a human solution to an industrial problem.
While the cowboys slowed down the trains, the deaths continued. The breaking point came on September 25, 1908, when 7-year-old Sethlo Haskamp was mowed down by the train while he was playing Follow the Leader. His death spurred public outcry, and 500 kids took to the streets in a protest. By 1929, the city had enough. The Transit Commission made a decision to elevate the railroad 30 feet above the pedestrians. It would be safer, but it would cost $2 billion in today's money, and more than 600 buildings would need to be demolished to make way for the new elevated rail line. 4 years later, in 1933, a locomotive hauling freight was the very first train to use the new elevated tracks. That engine started at 34th Street, thundered above the traffic below, and went uninterrupted all the way down to St. John's Terminal on Houston Street, a total journey of just over 2 miles. It was called High Line and actually ran through some of the buildings in its path.
The building that the trains originally went through was National Biscuit Company, which we now know as Nabisco. This is where the Oreo cookie was invented.
But as the High Line began, it meant an end to the endearing West Side Cowboys corralling 10th Avenue.
There's a particular picture of West Side Cowboy named George Hay riding his horse Cyclone.
On March 29, 1941, a proud 21-year-old made his final ride. By the 1950s, the rise of container shipping and interstate trucking revolutionized freight transportation. The West Side, once a hub of industry, began shedding its manufacturing base, and the rail line started to fade into obsolescence. Around November 1980, the High Line ended operations on the West Side with one last delivery, 3 containers full of frozen turkeys.
This was originally frozen storage. When it was converted into offices, it took more than 7 months for the whole building to thaw out. The train tracks originally, and still do, go right up to this building.
For nearly 2 decades, the rails stood abandoned and became a blight. Any sort of maintenance ended, and nature soon reclaimed the High Line, allowing native plants and wildflowers to flourish, and eventually overtaking the structure. A symbol of urban decay, the High Line became a target for developers eager to transform Chelsea, and a new mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, was ready to help them do it.
Giuliani really wanted to shut the High Line down to make way for traditional development.
The High Line blocked light. And there's a traditional attitude towards elevated structures that elevated structures are bad, they divide neighborhoods.
The story of saving the High Line starts at the very grassroots level, and not the kind currently growing on the rails. It's the energy that happened when Robert Hammond sat next to Joshua David at a community board meeting about the neighborhood eyesore, the abandoned elevated train.
We didn't know each other. I lived in Chelsea, he lived in Greenwich Village. And we were the only 2 people in the room, really, who wanted to see it saved. And neither of us wanted to do it alone, so we agreed to team up and do it together.
Robert and Josh, who believed in urban renewal and reuse, stood up against the demolition. And when Josh went up on the closed-off rails, it was unlike anything he had envisioned.
And I've sometimes described it as there's a secret door in your house or in your apartment that you open up and there's this whole other thing on the other side of the door. It was just an incredibly magical moment. There was a natural landscape up there that bewitched us all. So it was a very beautiful, natural, sort of scraggly, weedy, but very lush and enchanting landscape, spreading as far as you could see, going through Manhattan with buildings on all sides of you and the skyline and the river.
Robert and Joshua created a nonprofit conservancy group called Friends of the High Line, with a goal to reuse the structures, preserving an urban park for all. But they would need to act fast and garner support behind them. They decided to sell their vision by hiring a professional photographer, Joel Sternfeld, giving him unfettered access to the High Line.
For a year, he would come up whenever he thought the conditions were right, photograph the High Line. And those images are just incredibly magical. He captured something that nobody had captured before. They just spurred your imagination. What is this place? How could this place exist in the middle of the city? Those photographs were a great thing for selling the project.
What they didn't know was the clock was ticking loudly for the rail's demise by the mayor at that time, Rudolph Giuliani.
We didn't realize that people had been fighting about this for 10 years already. So there had already been a series of rulings that got it closer and closer to demolitions. And I think that's part of what frustrated the Giuliani administration so much. They'd worked on this for a long time and they were almost there and they were getting really close. And then we came along and threw a wrench in the works. We ultimately had to sue the city of New York. We sued the Giuliani administration.
Essentially, they accused the city of rushing through the demo project without going through the proper channels. They filed a lawsuit claiming the city had not undertaken the proper environmental review of the impending demolition.
I was a freelance magazine writer at this time. Talk about the least powerful person you could be. There's not anything much less powerful than that.
The idea to build an urban park reusing the rail train structure was launched by Joshua David and Robert Hammond, but first they had to fight City Hall to halt the impending demolition of the High Line.
Neither Robert nor I had any directly relevant experience. Not architects, not lawyers, not government people, not fundraisers. I knew you could sell a story if it had celebrity names in it. So in those early difficult days, we were always on the hunt for celebrities who would basically help us get press.
And one did volunteer to help them, Edward Norton, who not only lived in the neighborhood, but had a keen interest in the project.
This is the same for Kevin Bacon. Both of their fathers had an urban planning background. They were all people, and tons of artists and designers also who aren't celebrity names in that same way.
And the Friends of the High Line held a global design competition. Some unusual ideas rolled in.
Somebody proposed putting a cemetery up here. Somebody proposed grazing cows up here. We each had our favorite. Robert's was a 1.5 mile long swimming pool. And then another pair of young architects who we knew from the neighborhood proposed making a roller coaster on it. That was my favorite. The idea of a roller coaster going like through all the buildings of New York. We did an exhibition in Grand Central Terminal. It got a lot of press.
The competition was won by a bold new team named Field Operations. With them, the visionary design studio Diller Scofidio and Renfro, and master garden designer Pete Udolph. Then in March 2002, the Friends of the High Line stopped the wrecking ball, winning a significant lawsuit that halted the demolition of the High Line. Suddenly, hope was alive. Then came a powerful ally, incoming Mayor Michael Bloomberg. He saw the promise of a new public park in the sky and pledged his full support. But only on one pivotal condition.
The High Line happened because we agreed to pay for its ongoing maintenance and operations in perpetuity.
Our deal with the city of New York is don't destroy this space. And it will sit as a New York City park, but it is a New York City park that doesn't take any parks funds. 100% of the operating budget comes from private dollars. It takes $20 million a year to keep the High Line open and looking the way it does and free and accessible for everybody.
At many points, I was afraid that the idea would go south. There's only that much soil up there.
If you were designing a park, say at Central Park, you've got deep soil beds and deep roots you can do. Here, you've only got so much of a structure you can build in. And today there are over 200 species of plants on the High Line, some of which we can see right here from Gansevoort Street.
The first section of the High Line opened to the public on June 8, 2009, and it was an immediate success. Visitors experienced wild nature, first-class art and daring design. But there was no breathing room for Josh and Robert.
It advanced quickly because we were racing the political clock. We wanted to get as far as we could get while Mayor Bloomberg was the mayor. We were already in his second term in 2009, so we were like, we got a race to get Section 2 done, which went up to 30th Street. And then we had the very unexpected development of him getting a third term. And so we're like, oh my God, we've got a third term. How far can we go with that? And that's when we opened the part that goes around the West Side Rail Yards. I think we've had 3 major battles that we had to fight.
And then a fourth battle to link the Moynihan Station to the existing High Line.
I love that we have now linked probably one of the most beautiful train stations in the world, the Moynihan Train Hall, up with the High Line via this connector bridge.
One of the points of connection is the Timber Bridge, a 260-foot-long worn truss bridge made of sustainably sourced wood, which opened June 22, 2023.
The connector bridge is made up of over 2,000 pieces of yellow Alaskan cedar that have been forged from Oregon, sent up to British Columbia where they were fabricated and put together. They were assembled on Dyer Avenue into two huge pieces and then hoisted like an erector set one weekend afternoon onto pedestals.
We did want there to be quality architecture around us, and I think one of the special qualities of walking on the High Line today is walking along its length. It's like a who's who of modern architecture.
The construction of the High Line has been a boon to the West Side. What was once industrial is now the most expensive real estate in New York.
Chelsea, one of the most famous gallery districts in the United States of America, the High Line has itself become a gallery. Buildings done by some of this century's most famous architects.
Architectural eye candy.
One of my favorite of the new residential buildings along the High Line. It is just nearing completion now by the famous Denmark architect Bjarke Ingels and the BIG group. So you can see that the way the towers twist away from each other so that you're not just getting two big blocky towers, you're getting this kind of beautiful angle.
And how much is an apartment in this building? Anywhere from $2 to $10 million.
This is the Lantern House by Thomas Heatherwick and Heatherwick Studios from the UK, designed, as its name implies, to look like beautiful old-time lanterns. It is one of the most visually and architecturally unique residential buildings that you'll find here in Chelsea today.
An apartment here will set you back as much as $17 million.
When Neil Denari's residential building here, HL23, opened in 2012, it was actually very striking. It was the first of these, again, new wave buildings. You could see it's got a little bit of a cantilever, this beautiful curvy section, and it really took people by surprise when they first saw it in 2012.
And the price tag? $3 to $10 million. And the star of the show by the late great queen of curves.
520 West 28th Street, often also known as the Zaha Hadid building, named after the architect, the late Zaha Hadid. It's much more of a feminine touch, the sort of curvilinear designs. It essentially just seems to flow all the way around like a horizontal waterfall wrapping all the way around. Incredible floor-to-ceiling windows, a lot of outdoor space you get there. Like, it's very Jetsons.
The price of an apartment with those curves? A cool $38 million. While the High Line has evolved over time, there is one piece of the High Line that remains wild. Save for bags of neglected gravel left over from the original section of the elevated train.
There was a very elaborate real estate deal where an agreement was made for the train to actually run through the building.
The High Line once ran 2.5 miles from 34th Street to St. John's Terminal. By 1970, the section south of Gansevoort started to be demolished. But there is one section that was forgotten, a lone isolated piece of the High Line that runs through the Westbeth apartment building.
The fourth and third floor are cut out because that's where the train went through the property. If you're standing on the corner, you see where they literally just sort of sliced off the tracks.
The Westbeth building once housed Bell Laboratories. Talking pictures, radar, and the vacuum tube were just a few of the inventions born in this very building. The lab is long gone, as is the elevated train, except for this surviving section. In the 1970s, the building was reborn, offering affordable housing and studios for artists and their families and earning recognition as a National Historic Landmark.
All of the railroad infrastructure actually doesn't touch the main part of the building. You still see evidence of it.
Artists like Gwyn Duncan, a Westbeth resident, remembers the days of the deserted High Line.
So we used to go up there. You really weren't allowed, so we would go up there and we'd have picnics and it was sort of like a little hike, like a little day trip.
And the last piece of the High Line remains undeveloped.
What are we going to do with our old section of the High Line? It's unique in that it's sort of half of the block it's covered and half it's open to the sky. Would we make it a park? Would it become an art gallery? It could be a cool restaurant with an outdoor cafe. You know, it's all manner of possibilities.
With a little ingenuity, the artists of Westbeth will likely follow the steps of the High Line founders, who kept the grit of the rail structure, building beauty for all the public.
It was designed and it's being maintained at the level of the finest botanical gardens in the world. There are very, very few amazing horticultural landscapes like this that you can visit free of charge. I think we both take it greatly to heart that a number of other projects around the country and around the world have looked to the High Line and been inspired. The High Line has vastly surpassed our expectations and hopes and dreams.
It's like an oasis. It's lovely. And so to be able to walk from Moynihan Train Hall down to the West Village without ever stepping on a city block is just an absolute joy.